Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of The Pulse. Today, I am joined by my colleague, Karim. Karim, welcome. Very nice to have you.
Thank you, Saeeda.
So, Karim, before we start, I think one of the most interesting things I've learned about you over the last few weeks has been you're an old-timer in the region. You've been in and out of the region since, gosh, what is it, 1987?
Correct. Yeah, I first landed in Riyadh, 87, long time ago.
A very long time ago, indeed. How has the region evolved since then, in your view?
Well, a lot. I think, you know, as a country, Saudi has been on a, highway ever since the 80s, the 90s, and then, just fast track to today. It's impressive. And, you and I have been visiting recently Saudi. So it's impressive to say the least.
Absolutely. I think not only in the last 30, 40 some years, but even in the last few months since the COVID shutdown started. I think there's been tremendous change, tremendous movement, tremendous progress. And it's funny, but we were talking about this when you're there on the ground, you can feel the energy, you can feel the buzz and the excitement in the air. And it's truly revitalizing indeed.
Absolutely. It's refreshing.
Indeed. And I think it's a great start to 2021.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. And Karim, so you've done a lot of work in a lot of different elements, a lot of different aspects. And specifically in healthcare, you've spent many years focusing a lot on healthcare. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you landed on healthcare.
Yeah. So basically, I've started in the healthcare about 15 years ago. Back then, all governments were focusing on three things. How do we build capacity? How do we build more beds? How do we build more hospitals? And that was the focus. But then, along with these big initiatives, big investments in countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE, came a lot of challenges, on public health issues, on access issues, on quality issues. And that's where, the industry shifted on looking at these three areas. Um, when I started in healthcare, it was, how do we fast track these bed, commissioning of beds? That was the KPI. Back then, every country leader, every health minister was looking just at that KPI. Today, it's very different, right? Today, they're looking at, patient satisfaction. Are we treating the right patient at the right time, at the right level? Because there was a lot of discussions around, are we taking patients in the wrong level? Are we pushing healthcare at a, unbelievable cost?
Yeah.
And that's the biggest shift that happened in the industry.
Yeah, and it's understandable, right? I think given how fast the countries, the economies, the populations have grown and developed over the last few years, the primary concern would be around do we have the availability, which
Mhm.
is typically around beds, around the capacity. And just when you make sure you absolutely have that capacity and the availability, then I guess there's the additional tuning around the quality, the matching, the cost benefit analysis. So I guess that makes a lot of sense. And what are your views on how you see healthcare shaping up? I mean, we've gone through that first transition. We've gone through from the do we have it to do we have the right things in place? Now, given what we've just encountered and we are going through right now, what do you see as some of the longer term, long lasting impact of the pandemic on healthcare in the region?
Yeah, I think, look, three things come to mind. Number one, we've done a lot of thinking, whether with clients and the caliber I have, they have in leading healthcare in the region are fantastic. Big thinkers, big muscles, and I think it's now the time that they're realizing the need of activation. I think we've done a lot of thinking, we've done a lot of brainstorming, planning, scenario planning. And I think the one thing that we learned from COVID is let's go and do it. Let's try it, fail fast, learn from it, and move on. Saudi, UAE has been a fantastic role model when it comes to let's act fast, let's act now. So that's number one. Number two, in the industry, there used to be, interventions, I would say, and they were very short term. How do we solve for capacity? How do we solve for workforce? And it was always the investment was at the moment and not looking in the future. I think that's a second big shift that we're seeing in healthcare, where all these initiatives, all these investments are also taking in consideration the long term and localizing the capability. And I think it goes without saying that there was an era for healthcare where a lot of decisions were made haphazard. Now it's all based on data. It's all based on algorithms. It's looking at not only the now but also prediction and just taking those decisions. So the decisions in healthcare is becoming more intuitive, more fact-based, rather than just a feeling or a best practice that is done in other countries. And the region is very, very specific when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, especially around the first one, right? I think the culture very much has been around, let's make sure we get it right. Let's make sure that, everything is thought through and that there aren't any mistakes that are made along the way. We are in this uncharted territory. We need to make the best educated guess and frankly just move forward with it. And it's had phenomenal output, right? It has phenomenal outcomes because here we are, one of the best performing countries in the world, one of the best performing regions, I would say, along many, many dimensions. How much of that do you think is going to fundamentally change the fabric of how we do things and how we perform and how we look at change and transformation? Do you think this is some kind of discontinuity, and from now on there will be much more of an impact, action-oriented, focused mindset where there will be a much greater demand for results? Or do you think that we will, this is more of a short-term thing and we will go back to the old way of doing things?
No, I think this is a big shift in the industry, and especially in healthcare. We've gone away from let's try it to let's agree on an outcome and let's work towards it. So that's number one. So outcomes-based partnerships is going to be key in the coming area, right?
Yeah.
The mindset of people is no longer, as I said, it's no longer just let's do it and let's move on. It's how do we transform? And great examples in Saudi, for example, NEOM is thinking about the new city, about new healthcare delivery system. And NEOM is being very upfront in their thinking and saying, if it exists, we don't want it, right? So that's the type of leadership in healthcare in the region that we're dealing on day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and that's inspirational.
Very inspirational.
Yeah, absolutely. But it also begs the question, how can we help best a lot of these providers that are in uncharted territories to prepare for what's coming up ahead? Because if it is such a fundamental change from the way things have been done in the past, they will need some new tools, perhaps new ways of thinking and dealing with what's ahead.
Yeah, I think a lot of partners in healthcare, we're looking at just defining the problem and beating the problem to death. I think now it's no longer a game of what is the problem, is how do we fix it, right?
Yeah.
So you will see a lot of initiatives around, just activation, just change management, looking at data, not in the past, but also actionable data. It's not enough just to have tons of data. We need action. We need it now. So we're seeing a lot of shift in the way we're engaging with partners and our clients, and that's the mentality. A lot of leadership, change leadership and change activation is going
Mhm.
around, and those are the things that are going to change moving forward. I don't think we're going to go back to uh, the drawing board anymore.
Yeah, I can imagine. Once you've tasted the fast pace of change, it's not necessarily easy to go back to the old way of doing things.
Absolutely.
And I'm curious, what in your view makes healthcare so unique, so different? You know, you've worked across industries, you have the benefit of looking at it from multiple lenses. What is so specific about healthcare that makes
You
it
know,
change?
yeah, great question. When I started in IT and technology and software and system. It's exciting. It's always evolving. But healthcare has a different meaning um, in many ways, right? So you're working in an industry that you're part of. We all need healthcare, and
Mm.
anything that you do is touching your friends, your families, your loved ones. And it's that passion that drives me into healthcare. There's no other industry that I can think of that you put your family and friends within what you're doing and what you're transforming and what you're helping in achieving and inspiring. So that's key for me.
Yeah. Well, that's very, very, very interesting and exciting, but at the same time, it places frankly, a very heavy burden on you as an advisor, or frankly, anybody else who's part of this transformation. Because exactly as you said, it's so fundamental to us, to who we are, and it's so emotional that you just have to be very careful with how you do it, right? And when in the middle of this conversation, I almost feel myself slipping back into the old way of thinking, which is maybe we ought to think about it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times before we do anything. So how do I mean, how do you talk to, or what would you say to some of your clients, some of your colleagues that go through exactly this train of thought and this thinking, which is exactly what you said? It is so critical, it is so fundamental. Better to take some time and think through it before we jump into anything.
Now, look, I think in in this industry, you cannot just read a book and become a consultant. You have to live it, right?
Yeah.
So that's number one. I think um, any recommendation that you do, and that's why in A&M, we take
Yeah.
accountability on the execution. So it's even more accountability on us, because anything that we do is going to touch, all of us, right? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So this is where it's a mindset. It's an industry that no other industry has that um, theme, I would say, attached to it, and you cannot disconnect from it. It's you live it.
Indeed. You live it, whether you like it or not. It's part of our everyday life
Yeah.
forever and ever. Absolutely. Very interesting. So, what are your, I guess, top three the predictions, if you will, for the next year? What do you think will be some of the key themes driving healthcare in the region?
Look, I think there's going to be a lot of discussions, and now we're talking beyond government. So how do we bend the curve of cost? So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on organization, care providers, to really look at the cost of healthcare without compromising, the quality of healthcare. It's been the case for many years, but I think moving forward, we understood clearly what's the cost of, our assets, and how do we better utilize them. So that continues to be something that is a trend in moving forward. I think technology and data goes without saying. It proved that healthcare cannot run, just by emotions and feeling and gut feeling and
Mhm.
advisory. It has
Yeah.
to be fact based. It has to be with data. It has to be it makes sense, right? And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and COVID proved it to us. And
Mm.
that's the fact of putting the physicians and frontliners to do what they do best. I think history tells us that we often saw a lot of healthcare providers doing work that is not their core competency, paperwork, administrative work. And COVID proved to us that, these are wasted skills that can provide, care. And that's what they need to provide. So there are going to be a lot of culture change to rethink the model of delivery of care and focusing people on what they do best.
Very interesting. So there will be focus on cost, there will be technology, and there will be changes in model of care. So
Absolutely.
essentially, fundamentally, the way healthcare is practiced, the way it's delivered will be relooked at.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And how would one prioritize between these three? Do you think there's one obvious one where a lot of the providers locally, regionally would probably start out with, or do you think these are three that need to go hand in hand?
Again, we go back to the point of, there's no time in healthcare. I think it's going to be do it now, do it fast, learn, move on. And it's going to be all happening at the same time.
So very busy days ahead for
very busy days. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Karim. It's been a pleasure having you here, and I look forward to continuing.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here too.
Thank you. Bye.